The Rocky Mountains, spanning the North American continent, holds massive amounts of wilderness with 190 million acres within it. Many secrets and discoveries are laying in wait or hiding in plain sight. A rugged world and not easily suitable for human habitat, one in which organisms which live there have adapted to the harsh environment, creating marvels to behold. Some, yet few, embark on missions and quests into the deep unknown, shrouded in mystery with eons of history. Those with the drive to discover continue to push beyond the next range, hill, or valley in order to satisfy their deep curiosity and need to push the human experience. There is a creature, a species of hominid inhabiting this great continent. They lurk and wander their mountainous and forest domains when the sun goes down. They creep all the way into our towns and cities and can be found on the fringes of civilization, hunting and interacting with the unsuspecting victims of their curiosity. The moon's out. It's pretty nice. But would you believe that out here behind me, there's a group of North American hominid species. One's coming down here right now from wherever they're camped. I suspect that they're on the move from the last camp they were at back to this one. They have like these domiciles deep within the bushes here. In the brush, hidden in plain sight. There's trails and roads all around me, well-traveled ones. But in this dense vegetation and brush, no one wants to go in there. It's literally the place humans would least prefer to explore. Take myself for example. I'll explore the hardest to reach places out of curiosity. But these areas, I just stay out of because it's inconvenient. Well, surprise, surprise. They definitely use them. And they're coming back. The first clue of the presence of these North American hominids are stick breaks that weave through thick vegetation and brush. You may be surprised to find that these stick breaks will create trails that go through this dense vegetation. In fact, you'll find all kinds of stick breaks. New, small, and even large. You will find these stick breaks along trails, and they'll lead to more stick breaks and weave an intricate web through dense brush. It shall soon become evident that these stick breaks have a purpose and are everywhere. Some are as guides to the dense forest, others are as boundary markers. And there are still many mysteries to be solved on what the stick breaks mean and what other functions they may have.
One thing is clear, the stick breaks is how you track them.
Next, we will take a look at a North American hominid stick break versus that of a known animal, and it becomes clear that there are differences. Here is a perfect area where we can see a bear marker. So basically, the bear comes on here and he rubs it up against it. So when he breaks it up top, it shows how much taller he is so that other bears can look out. So this is a big bear right here. And other evidences to prove this can be found on the bottom part of it, where you can see the claw marks. So That's pretty clear there. And you can actually see the top of it broken off. However, adjacent to it, also what could be confused as a bear marker, we have something much, much different. Here, we have the North American hominid making its tree breaks for either territorial reasons or as a marker to help it navigate through this area to avoid people. Look at that. The leg was twisted and actually goes on one side of the branch and the other. And the other sign of this, besides it looking much different, is that there's no claw marks at all.
These stick breaks can be found elsewhere around North America. These stick breaks are going to be easiest seen off roads and trails and lead deep inside the woods and brush. Following the trail of sticks has led to some intriguing finds. For the most part, these trails will lead out of the dense brush and woods and down into open spaces. From observation, they seem to prefer to follow waterways where there's the most vegetation. And along these waterways, they will pan out to open spaces where the evidence suggests they are hunting deer. Following the breaks has led to some incredible finds, like this deer leg hanging from this Y-shaped branch. This is not the first deer leg to be hanging from Y-shaped branches, and other animal parts have been discovered as well. On first glance, these deer legs can be dismissed as mountain lion or some other type of animal, or even people, but on closer inspection, you start to see that the joints have actually been ripped off from their sockets and the tendons still remain. In fact, it looks like they've been twisted and turned in order to break the joints. Other animals can't do this without leaving a trace of teeth marks or claw marks or ripping through the tendons themselves. Furthermore, we have examples like this where a deer leg has been split in two places and there's no evidence of teeth marks or scratch marks or even crushing marks to explain how it broke, but the bone marrow has been sucked out. Following the stick trail leads me to something even more astonishing, something that surprises me. And now you get to see my first reactions when I stumbled upon it.
This is insane. I found where the deer remains were that we found earlier, the fresh one, and it's a trail that came all the way to here that something large came through. Still carefully, but they still broke stuff along the way. Well, let's see if we can discern anything. Look at that. It's been peeled off. It's been... Oh my gosh. It's literally... been peeled off of a deer and just thrown here. I wonder if the rest of the deer's here. You know what we're gonna do? We're going to re-soak this hide and see if there's any marks on it. Because this doesn't happen in nature. The animals just rip through the skin and the fur, and it's not nice like this, like just totally ripped off. This is going to teach us a lot.
And it has. This suggests that the main food source in this area for the North American hominid are deer. When we take a look at the deer hide that was soaked in water following the stick breaks, we find something else. A deer hide that's been ripped off with brute force, similar to that the way a human would skin a rabbit. There are no knife marks, there are no claw marks, and there are no teeth marks. The neck is still intact, though ripped with force. The legs have been ripped out. It is clear to see whatever did this had tremendous strength. Without the use of claws or teeth, which is suggestive of the North American hominid, and using hands. I have gone to great lengths to be critical, and I have brought this to many professional hunters and wildlife biologists for the region. They are all stumped. So far, this pelt and the odd fashion the deer legs have found themselves in are the evidence that helps support that this North American hominid is out and about and very close to civilization. If we go back in time, we can see how this journey began years ago in a place I spent a lot of time after work. One evening, pebbles were thrown at me from the brush line. Thinking it was a person, I went in to investigate, only to be met with something that shook my very foundations. For years afterwards, I felt uncomfortable in the woods, knowing that such an apex predator existed. I finally resolved that the only way to face my fears was to understand this hominid better. I embarked to make initial contact with my girlfriend Madison. It took 3 months of going into the same spot every other night. Patience finally persevered, and on that night,
around 11 o'clock, pebbles started getting thrown at the Jeep. I realized that Bigfoot was real.
that's when I knew contact had finally arrived, and it was just as scary as the first time. This night is what made me take a second look at the fresh stick breaks I had seen the week before. The reason for this is because in the spot that the pebbles had been thrown from, there were multiple stick breaks. Initially, I thought the stick breaks may have been from people. After all, they crossed some very well-traveled trails. However, I was suspicious why someone would take so much time to make these breaks going through very deep brush. After the pebble throws and the breaks left behind, it started to become clear that something else was happening. I found some new fresh breaks, far too big for a person to do, and became convinced of my suspicions. The breaks were being done by this North American hominid. The pebble breaks lasted around a month and a half, every night until they started happening less and less frequently and later into the evening. A lot was learned during this time. Another suspicion that kept itching at me was that the pebbles would start being thrown at us and the Jeep right before dark. I could not understand if they were making their way from the foothills down to where I was, how they were getting to us so quickly. This meant they had to start their trek in the day to reach us before dark. I had ideas about where they might be and how they were coming down from the foothills, but nothing prepared me for the truth. The truth was revealed over a month later, when my girlfriend was walking on a trail in midday that goes right through the dense brush where we had been getting pebbles thrown at us from. As she walked, something large started throwing pebbles at her and paralleling her walking through the dense brush, stopping whenever she would stop. She was so frightened when she realized what it was that she ran all the way back to her car. I had been so busy following the stick breaks that led further down into the open spaces where the deer hide and animal parts were being found, and assuming that the North American hominid would be far away from humans during the day, I failed to realize what the evidence was pointing to the whole time. They had been living in that dense cluster we had been parked at in the middle of trails and roads this entire time. That's why they could reach us so early before nightfall. They were literally only 100 yards away. The pebble throws had begun to be less frequent and later at night, which suggested they were moving further away. The first time I went in to investigate, I was apprehensive and downright scared I might run into one. Luckily, I did not run into one. However, I did come across some amazing finds. But if you check this out, right here is a huge, looks almost like a nest built into the earth. And I'm pretty confident that what's creating these is, whatever this wilderness hominid is that lives in these parts. In the dense brush clusters following the stick breaks, I found these large, bowl-like shapes and also depressions in the ground where something large had been sleeping, which suggested that the North American hominid had been staying here. They look very reminiscent of large ape-type nests like gorillas, where they'll build nests during the day and just dig a bowl out big enough for themselves. I have found strange hair samples at these sites and have yet to verify them. And of course, you also have bears. Bears will also do something similar, except they'll be much, much smaller, and normally the vegetation will be totally cleared. Up on a hill nearby the nests, there's evidence of smaller nests. It's a good overwatch position. Over here you can see how it looks like two small depressions were created. And you can find these scattered throughout this area, perhaps twins. By some of the big nests, you could find trees that looked like hands had rubbed up against them many times. You could also find stick breaks in the nearby vicinity and strange marks that look almost like nail marks. I've never seen a bear do that before.
There's evidence that something's been climbing up this tree and breaking all like the limbs down as it does it. And it happens to be right next to the small impression, which I can never be 100% certain until I actually see the hominid in the act, that what I find is indeed of their making. But the supporting and circumstantial evidence is overwhelming, and in time we'll find out for sure whether these nest sites are indeed created by the North American hominid. From what I can tell, when they're around people, they tend to try to hide their tracks and for the most part do a pretty good job. But they're not infallible. They can still be spotted. However, when they're going up into the mountains from the foothills, they'll use ravines, and it looks like they use the same ones with the stick breaks. They won't go on the same place twice, but I've been lucky to find areas after a good rain where they went up and down. The interesting thing that I've been finding is that a lot of these routes will parallel sometimes human trails
in order to get up into the mountains. And of course, I've been lucky to actually find what look like heel prints, large heel print. And if I'm interpreting this right, it looks like they like to go heel first on the downhill slope. Hopefully you can see this. But here's in the moss, and this must be pretty new. It looks like a footprint or a handprint. I'm gonna go with footprint. And I noticed this first little scuff mark. Like something was going up here. But yeah, that's detailed. The trails following the stick breaks have certainly revealed a lot of evidence on the environment to support this hominid. There is even evidence to suggest that they may break large pine limbs and use them to hide their tracks. Of course, more observation is needed. There's just so much that's been found that's intrigued me. In fact, a lot of it's not here. There's also a lot of stuff that I don't know where to place it yet, because it could be nothing, so I haven't really added it on. So what you are seeing are the main bulk of what I've been able to find and some of my assessments on it. Of course, I don't have time to get into the details right now, but hopefully in the future I'll be able to make some more videos that go into more detail on some of the things and observations that I have made. With this information, hopefully those of you that watch can use this to go out and find evidence of your own, because they're out there. In fact, they're closer to civilization than I would care to feel comfortable with. I think it's important and to be aware that a lot of paradigms and views will change even in this video. A lot of this is, of course, supportive and circumstantial evidence based on my interpretations, which are definitely subject to change, and most likely a lot of it will change. But from what I've gathered right now, this is the picture that's been painted to me, and hopefully I've been able to show you what I have found. I try my best to cross-reference between known animal species and the behaviors that they do on the environment versus what they don't do in order to exclude them. But the truth is, we're still learning about a lot of these animals that we see all the time, like bear, deer, cougar, and some of this evidence that's come across could very well be a known species, but that's okay, because the journey is a long one, but we have to do it step by step and follow the evidence. I've been wrong on my hypothesis so many times, and my assessments and assumptions, until the evidence pointed me in the right direction. As you can tell in this video, I've been surprised more times than I care to admit. It is my recommendation that if you want to go out and search for these hominid species, to do it in an area that you've researched the history well, places that don't have any hunting or bad stories attributed to these species in the past. The next step for me is to go out there and just wait for them to approach me. I'm confident at this point that they're willing to. However, let's not kid ourselves. When you realize that an apex predator that shouldn't exist does exist, it's no easy feat to place yourself in a vulnerable position where they can approach you. But I've been doing this for a year now and having daily interactions, and I'm confident that they mean me no harm. However, it's still very intimidating and scary. At the end of the day, I truly believe that the only way to get verifiable evidence is to build a rapport with these hominid species that are excellently adapted to their environments. Trick them once and they adapt, and you never find them again. So the only way is to get accepted by their troop, and that's the goal that I'm after.